I begin this series of sermons today with a fair amount of trepidation on two fronts. First of all, I am no movie critic or film expert, and so I realize it's a bit cheeky of me to think that I can analyze the themes of a movie well enough to then look at it through the lens of the gospel. But secondly, my other fear is that I realize I'm beginning this series with the latest incarnation of perhaps the most successful movie franchise in the history of motion pictures. Star Wars has not only been a financial juggernaut, but it's affected our language, our culture, and even our national mythology. Even someone like Lois, who turns up her nose at the very mention of anything Star Wars, even she has not been able to escape its impact on us all. She even knows who Darth Vader is. Plus, all 7 of these movies have been analyzed by an army of professional critics, as well as legions of geeks and nerds. Whenever 2 of my sons-in-law get together, at least half of their conversation is about Star Wars. I'm not calling them geeks or nerds. They just do that. Now, film critics and philosophers and psychologists and literary experts have written about the deep rivers of Jungian archetypes that flow through all these movies, and that explains a lot of their popularity. But it seems to me that their appeal is their stark portrayal of good versus evil. Now, I want to see a show of hands again. How many of you have seen the latest film, The Force Awakens? Very good. How many of you have seen any of the Star Wars movies? That's just about all of you. Okay.
How many have never?
I know you've already asked that. So, you know that in episodes 1, 2, and 3, you knew that the Old Republic was good, and you knew that the Sith was evil. In episodes 4, 5, and 6, you knew the rebellion was good and the Galactic Empire was evil. Now, in this latest film, The Force Awakens, you're told right from the opening crawl that a new evil called the First Order has arisen from the ashes of the old empire, and the forces of good are now represented by the New Republic and their resistance fighters. Soon we're introduced to a woman named Rey, who we know is good because she's dressed in white or off-white, and then the evil Kylo Ren is not only dressed in black, but he's got a big black hood and a black mask, which to me looks an awful lot like a cross between Darth Vader and an anteater. But what do I know? In Star Wars, good and evil are white and black. They're either or, they're one or the other. And as much as I like to point to the Bible's shades of gray, there are places where it is black or white too. Probably one of the most famous verses in all of the New Testament, John 3:16 says, God so loved the world that he gave his only Son so that everyone who believes in him may not perish but have eternal life. Choice is clear. Choose this way and not that way. Whether in this world or the next, there's a lifeline out there, and you have to take hold of it. You have to choose to take hold of it or not. It's a no-brainer, John says. Sometimes, like Star Wars, faith boils down to good versus evil, right versus wrong, yes versus no. The choice is clear to anybody with one eye and half sense. I read recently about a grizzled old trapper who wandered out of a Texas swamp and into a church for the very first time in his life. And for the first time, he heard the preacher sermonizing about Jesus' crucifixion. And for the first time, he heard about the treachery of the religious leaders and the cruelty of the Roman soldiers. And when the preacher had finished, the old trapper stood up from his seat and he drawled, "Preacher, all I can say is it's just too bad the Texas Rangers weren't there." Sometimes, like Star Wars, it looks pretty simple. It's black or white, good versus evil, and the choices aren't hard. But any Star Wars aficionado knows that it's not that simple. Just like any full-grown adult registered voter and licensed driver knows it's not that simple. Good and evil are much more nuanced than that. If you saw The Empire Strikes Back, do you remember how shocked you were when you first learned that Luke Skywalker is Darth Vader's son? And in The Force Awakens, you feel this conflict between Kylo Ren, only to discover that it's there because he is the child of Han Solo and Leia Organa from the earlier movies. Are we being set up for another cataclysmic struggle like unto Anakin Skywalker trying to break free from Darth Vader? And though the leaders of the First Order make sure that they dress in black so we'll know that they're evil, their stormtroopers' armor is pristine white. And one of them, called Finn, can't bring himself to kill innocent people, and so he becomes one of the good guys. So much for everything being clear and clean. Remember all those cartoons you've seen with an angel standing on a person's shoulder telling him to do the right thing, and there's a devil on the other shoulder telling him to do the wrong thing? You ever seen those cartoons? Recently I saw a cartoon that had the angel and the devil on the same shoulder, and they were saying, "Man, do it or don't do it. We don't care anymore." We thought we knew what Star Wars was all about, and then we're thrown these curveballs. We thought we knew what life was about, and then everything gets muddled. The Bible knows that's the way it is. On occasion, the choices are clear, but often they defy our comprehension. It's the nature of reality. In 1 Corinthians 2, Paul says, "What human being knows what is truly human except the human spirit that is within? So also no one comprehends what is truly God's spirit except the Spirit of God." In other words, some stuff will continue to elude us this side of heaven, like the ambiguity of the ending of The Force Awakens. We don't always know what to make of the information we have. The movie ends without us knowing who Rey is. We don't really know why she goes to all the trouble to find Luke Skywalker and deliver his lightsaber to him. And until we cross the threshold between earth and heaven, a lot of stuff in this life is going to continue to mystify us too. It's one of the old classic Peanuts comic strips where Snoopy's on top of his doghouse writing a novel. He has a typewriter. Nowadays, I guess he would have a laptop. But he's writing a novel on top of his doghouse, and the novel reads this far: "It was a dark and stormy night. Suddenly a shot rang out. A door slammed. The maid screamed. While millions of people were starving, the king lived in luxury. Suddenly, a pirate ship appeared on the horizon. Meanwhile, on a small farm in Kansas, a boy was growing up. At that moment, a young intern at City Hospital was making an important discovery. The mysterious patient in room 213 had finally awakened. Stampede, the foreman shouted, and 40,000 head of cattle thundered down on the tiny camp." And then Snoopy looks out at you and says, "In the last frame, I tie all this together." The time will come when God will tie all the loose ends of our lives together, but until then, we have to live with a lot of ambiguity. So I applaud The Force Awakens and the entire Star Wars universe for acknowledging that life and faith don't always add up like we expect them to. One of the youth just a moment ago said the Force was good, but the whole point in all of these movies is the Force can be used for bad as well. But there's one theme in these movies that I wish got more emphasis than it does. It's there, but it's not emphasized a lot. And I'm talking here about the difference between power and authority. Power and authority. Now, power is the prerogative to determine what happens and the coercive force to make others yield to your wishes, even against their own will. And no one would argue that all the bad guys in The Force Awakens and all the other movies, they define power that way. They will destroy anybody who gets in their way. But I would argue that the good guys in The Force Awakens and in the earlier films operate much the same way. No, they won't be deliberately cruel or uncaring, but they do seek to accomplish their goals using raw power too. They too will force others to do their bidding against their own will if it suits their aims. Now, sociologist Tony Campolo says that's the reason why the use of power is inconsistent with Christian faith. Jesus was no milquetoast. Jesus certainly stood his ground against his opponents, but he never forced anyone to do something against their will. Matthew 7 ends the Sermon on the Mount by saying, "The crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes who wielded their power to enforce what they thought." Jesus wielded authority, not power. Authority is the ability to persuade without coercion. Authority is the capacity to present oneself in a way that helps others want to obey. Authority is different from power, and history is littered with the detritus of those who confuse the two, including the church. One of the reasons why the church is such a big joke to most people these days is because we have too often opted for power over authority. Jesus exercised authority, not power, and he understood you can't have both. As power increases, authority decreases. And as authority increases, power decreases. When Han Solo confronts his son, Ben, near the end of The Force Awakens, and Ben, of course, as I mentioned, has taken on the persona of Kylo Ren, Han Solo doesn't try to coerce him into turning away from the dark side of the Force. He uses his authority as a loving parent. And of course, those of you who've seen the movie are sitting there saying, well, yeah, look what it got him. His own son murdered him. And I say, well, yeah, there are risks inherent in both power and authority. And one of authority's risks is vulnerability. Jesus had authority and he was killed. And yet our faith tells us that even his death was transformed into victory. Tell me, have all the armies who have ever marched across this globe accomplished more than he did? Did the power of the Galactic Empire accomplish more than Obi-Wan Kenobi did? Did Darth Sidious, a.k.a. the Galactic Emperor, accomplish more than Luke Skywalker did? Those of you who've seen The Force Awakens, do you really think that Ren and Finn and the other characters in these new Star Wars movies are going to be successful ultimately through the use of coercive power? I know. Some of you are sitting there thinking, well, there he goes again, telling us to make nice with the Islamic terrorists and hold hands and sing Kumbaya with the North Koreans. But I'm not going there. I'm just saying that in my reading of the gospel, and you can disagree with me, but in my reading of the gospel of Jesus Christ, I see him living and teaching as one having authority. And as followers of Jesus, I just think that's the way we ought to operate too. The other option didn't keep the First Order from arising on the ashes of the Galactic Empire, nor has the other option ever solved the problems of our world in any ultimate sense. Maybe it's time to give Jesus' way a chance. When Mussolini's regime in Italy collapsed in 1943, German troops swooped in to occupy all of the territories that Italy had previously controlled, including the country of Greece. On the little Greek island of Zakynthos, the governor of the German occupation, a Nazi by the name of Behrens, ordered the mayor of Zakynthos city, a man named Lucas Carrar, to make a list of all the Jews living on the island and to give it to him so that the Jews could be rounded up and transported to the death camps in Poland. Reluctantly, Mayor Carrar sat down and made the list, some 275 Jewish souls. But he was so troubled that before he took the list to Barons, he paid a visit to Bishop Chrysostomos, the head of the Greek Orthodox Church on Zakynthos. And the bishop said, "You can't give that list to Barons. Don't give it to Barons. Burn it. And tomorrow you and I will go and pay him a visit." So the next day, Bishop Chrysostomos and Lucas Khazar appeared before German occupation Governor Barons, and the bishop said, "You cannot deport the Jews from this island. They are law-abiding citizens. They've lived here in peace and quiet among us for hundreds of years. They've never bothered anybody, and all the people of Zakynthos will be offended if you take them away." Barons was unmoved. He said, "I have my orders. Give me the list of names." Bishop Chrysostomos pulled a paper from his pocket and he said, "Here's the list you required." And Barons unfolded it and saw only 2 names on the list: Bishop Chrysostomos and Mayor Lucas Farrar. Barons' mouth fell open in disbelief. These 2 were willing to give themselves up before turning in any Jews. And then the bishop handed Barons another paper, this one a personal letter to Hitler, telling him that he, Bishop Chrysostomos, had sole authority over the Jews on Zakynthos. Now, both the bishop and the mayor knew that the letter and the list wouldn't deter Barons, but it would give them some time. And so they went and warned all 275 of the Jews on the island and told them to flee into the hills. And the bishop arranged for them to hide in Christian homes where they would be fed and cared for. And so it was when the Soviet army liberated the island of Zakynthos in late 1944, all 275 Jews came out of hiding and resumed their lives. Thanks to 2 men who had no power, but who had authority and were willing to risk everything to do what Jesus wanted them to do. Now, I suppose you expect me at this point to end my sermon by saying, "May the force be with you." But instead, I'll say, "May the Spirit of Jesus be with you as you exercise authority, not power, to do what Jesus wants you to do." Amen.